Ever wonder how a goddess turned a spider into the world's first knitting pro? Tonight, you're about to find out. A tale so slow, so soothing, even your cozy blanket will get jealous. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into ancient Greece, where gods and mortals mingle, and weaving isn't just a craft, it's a divine art. Picture yourself in a sunlit olive grove, the breeze carrying faint whispers of myths and soft rustles of spinning wool. Now imagine a goddess named Athena. Not just any goddess, but the goddess of wisdom, crafts, and yes, knitting. She wasn't about to let anyone outweave her. You're about to hear the story of how she turned a humble spider into a legendary knitting master. And trust me, you probably can't handle the fluffiness of this tale. You'll be tangled in threads of laughter and wonder before you know it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm curious, where in the world this ancient story is helping you drift off tonight? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself wandering through the market squares of Athens, where the air smells of olive oil, fresh bread, and a hint of wool freshly spun. Women sit outside their homes, fingers deftly dancing over spinning wheels and looms, crafting cloths as intricate as the myths told around flickering fires. Among them walks Athena herself, radiating a calm but powerful presence. She carries with her the knowledge of the loom, the spindle, and the art of weaving, a skill so sacred it was whispered to have been taught to mortals by the gods. But Athena's craft is not just about making fabric, it's about storytelling, pride, and sometimes a touch of divine mischief. You hear a soft rustle, the delicate weaving of silk threads, almost like the spinning of a spider's web. And with that sound, our story begins. You've heard of the gods and their legendary powers, but have you ever heard of how a mortal girl became the first to challenge a goddess? Tonight, we dive into the origins of the first spider and how she almost spun her way to the top. Long time ago, in the sun-soaked hills of Lydia, lived a young woman named Arachne. Now, Arachne wasn't just any mortal. No, she was a weaver. And not just any weaver. She was the finest in all of Greece. Her fingers moved with such speed and grace that it seemed as if the very threads listened to her commands. People marveled at her skill. They came from miles around to watch her weave. And she did it effortlessly. Her tapestries weren't just cloth, they were masterpieces, woven with scenes from myths and nature, so realistic, they seemed to come to life. Her fame spread like wildfire, and as the crowds grew, so did her confidence. Soon, Arachne began boasting that she was the best weaver to ever live, and, as you can guess, not just the best in Lydia, but the best in all of Greece. Word of her arrogance reached the ears of none other than Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, who was known for her humility and skill with the loom. Athena, you see, took great pride in teaching mortals the ways of weaving and weaving as a divine art. So one day, Athena appeared to Arachne in the form of an old woman, humble and wise, and gently warned her, "Young weaver, you have great skill, but beware of your pride. There is no one greater than the gods. We are the ones who pass on the arts, and you should be careful not to challenge that." But Arachne, brimming with youthful arrogance, scoffed. She didn't want the wisdom of the gods. She only wanted the respect of her peers. She fired back with a challenge. "I am better than any god at weaving. I dare you to match my skill. Let's have a contest, you and me." Athena, ever patient but deeply offended, agreed to the challenge. She stepped back, not as a goddess, but as a rival, a humble mortal weaver herself. The two set up their looms, each prepared to outdo the other with their craftsmanship, and thus the contest began. You could hear the subtle hum of the spools as the threads twined, the air thick with tension. Athena's fingers worked like the wind, swift and precise, creating a tapestry of divine beauty, one that depicted the gods in their majestic glory, each figure glowing with radiant power. But Arachne, she wove something different, a tapestry so vivid and detailed, it showed the gods in their flaws, making them human, vulnerable, and sometimes foolish. Her tapestry depicted scenes of Zeus's affairs, Hera's jealousy, and even the tricks of Hermes, revealing the god's darker side. And she did it all with a wicked grin on her face, daring Athena to prove her wrong. The contest is on. 2 weavers, 1 goddess and 1 mortal, each with a loom and a challenge that will decide the fate of one of them. Who will win the ultimate weaving battle, and what happens when the gods are challenged? The tension in the air was palpable as Athena and Arachne worked tirelessly, weaving with all their might, the sound of threads pulling, the rhythmic clicking of the looms, and the occasional gasp from the onlookers filled the space between them. The gods watched from above, curious, intrigued, though perhaps not worried, for who could rival a goddess? Athena's tapestry was a masterpiece of divine beauty. Each thread shimmered with gold and silver, the gods' forms outlined in the finest detail. You could see Zeus on his throne, Hera watching over the heavens, and Poseidon commanding the seas, all illuminated with a brilliance only a goddess could produce. But Arachne's work was different. Her tapestry wasn't just beautiful, it was alive with energy. The gods, in all their glory, were there too, but in a much different light. She showed them not as perfect beings, but as imperfect, flawed, and very human. Zeus was shown seducing mortals, Hera in fits of jealousy, and Poseidon causing storms out of rage. Her craftsmanship was astonishing. The colours were richer, the scenes more vivid. There was a sense of mischief in the way she had depicted the gods, as if daring them to come down and confront her. The gods watched in stunned silence. Even Athena couldn't help but be impressed by the skill and audacity of the mortal before her. As the last thread was pulled tight, the loom stopped, the room fell silent, and all eyes were on the 2 tapestries, each one shimmering with divine and mortal energy. Athena stood before her creation, her face unreadable. She looked at Arachne's tapestry, and for a moment, there was no reaction. Just a deep, contemplative silence. Then, something strange happened. Athena's eyes flashed with wrath. How dare this mortal mock the gods so boldly? How could she not see the divinity in her work? Athena, the goddess who had taught mortals the very arts Arachne was so proud of, felt her power slip. The audacity of this young woman, the pride, the disrespect. In one swift motion, Athena raised her hand, and the room filled with a bright, blinding light. Arachne froze. She knew what was coming. She had dared to challenge a goddess, and now she would face the consequences. But what Athena did next shocked everyone. Instead of striking Arachne down, instead of turning her into stone, or casting her into eternal darkness, Athena transformed her. With a snap of Athena's fingers, Arachne felt her body begin to change. Her fingers, once so nimble with thread, began to shrink and elongate, her body shrinking as well. Her eyes widened in shock and fear as her form morphed into something strange, something not human anymore. Before anyone could react, Arachne stood before them, not as a proud mortal, but as a spider. The gods looked on, horrified and fascinated. Arachne's punishment wasn't death. It was a life of weaving in silence, spinning webs from her own body for all eternity. Athena, her anger still simmering, said in a voice that echoed across the room, "You have the skill to weave, but now you shall weave forever. Let your artistry be your curse." The gods were silent. Arachne, now a spider, scuttled to her loom and began her eternal work, spinning webs of intricate beauty. From proud weaver to a spider forever spinning her threads. What happens when a mortal is cursed to weave for eternity? Tonight, the transformation of Arachne begins. and her life changes in the most unexpected way. The room buzzed with whispers, but Arachne didn't hear them. She was no longer part of the world of mortals, no longer among those who could walk on 2 feet and weave with human hands. Her body was small, agile, and covered with a delicate layer of silk. Her legs, now long and spindly, perfect for climbing and spinning. Athena stood still, watching, her face still a mixture of anger and perhaps a hint of pity. She had given Arachne a fate worse than death. Arachne's fingers, once so skilled at crafting beautiful tapestries, were now transformed into delicate spinning limbs, able to weave threads of silk, but trapped in the silence of her own curse. For a long moment, Arachne could hardly comprehend what had happened. She reached up with her new, nimble legs, feeling the silky strands of her web forming around her. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she felt her heart beat faster as she tried to resist the change. But it was too late. Arachne was no longer human. She had become a spider, a creature of darkness and patience, bound to weave for eternity. But even as she felt the weight of the curse settle in her, something deep inside her resisted. It wasn't fair. She had been proud, yes, but she had also been talented, a mortal who had dared to match the gods. And now she was a spider, a symbol of the gods' power over mortals, their ability to crush those who dared challenge them. First, Arachne was paralyzed by the sheer strangeness of her new form. She couldn't speak, couldn't move the way she used to. She felt like a ghost in her own body. Her loom still stood before her, as if mocking her, reminding her of what she had once been, a proud mortal who had dared to challenge the gods. But then, as the days passed, something shifted. Something in her changed. With her new limbs, Arachne could weave faster than ever before. She could spin beautiful webs of intricate detail, creating works of art that no mortal could ever dream of. The silk flowed from her with ease, and as she worked, she realized that her craft hadn't disappeared. It had only changed. She was still weaving. But now, she wove not for beauty, but for survival. The days turned to weeks, then months, then years. Over time, Arachne learned to embrace her curse. She spun webs of stunning beauty, each thread a reflection of her lost humanity and her newfound existence. The world outside her web seemed distant, unreachable, but her work was all she had. No one came to visit her. No one sought her out for her wisdom or for her weaving. She was alone in the silence of her existence, weaving for eternity, a prisoner of her own skill. But the webs she spun were masterpieces, forever immortalizing her in the thread of time. And so Arachne weaved and wove and spun. Her punishment had become her life. Her life had become her art. From punishment to purpose, Arachne's spinning was no longer just a curse. It became a symbol. Tonight, we delve into the deeper meaning behind her endless weaving, a process that connects her fate with the world itself. Arachne's life had transformed in ways she never imagined, from the pride of being the best mortal weaver to the eternal curse of weaving in silence. But as time passed, she began to see something new in her work. At first, she thought of her webs as nothing more than a punishment, a reminder of her pride, a painful symbol of the mistake she had made. Each thread she wove felt like an echo of her defeat, a tangible link to her fall from grace. But as her legs moved effortlessly, weaving and spinning, the meaning of her task began to evolve. The spinning of threads became more than just a task for survival. It became a meditation, a way to reflect, to connect with the world beyond her web, to reconcile her present self with the woman she had once been. Each thread, as it slipped from her body and spun into the air, carried with it a piece of herself, a tiny fragment of her former pride, now woven into something entirely new. The patterns she wove were intricate, detailed, and beautifully complex, and over time, they took on a deeper meaning. Arachne had become more than just a spider. She had become a symbol of persistence, of transformation, of the capacity to create beauty even when trapped in an unending cycle. The act of weaving no longer felt like a curse, it felt like a connection to the world. Her webs began to take on more than just decorative qualities. Some of them mirrored the stories of the gods, their battles, their triumphs, their flaws. Others depicted scenes of nature, full of life and energy, things she could no longer touch but could still imagine. Her spinning was not just the act of creating a home, but the act of preserving what was important to her, the beauty of life, even in its most flawed and imperfect form. The gods, who once looked down on her, perhaps expecting to see nothing but a fallen mortal, now began to see her differently. Her webs were art, and in a way, her art was immortal. And yet, even with her new understanding of her work, Arachne could never shake the sense of loss. She had once been immortal, full of ambition, pride, and life. Now, she was something different. She was still connected to the world, but she was also apart from it. Her existence was no longer bound by time or by human expectations. But in her eternal silence, as she spun, she found a new purpose. Her webs, unlike anything the world had ever seen before, told the story of a woman who had risen from the ashes of her own downfall, creating beauty even in the most impossible of circumstances. She had transformed from a mortal who challenged a goddess to a goddess in her own right, mastering the art of weaving for eternity. Arachne had become more than a mere mortal's tale of pride and punishment. She had become a story of resilience, a myth within a myth. What if I told you that weaving wasn't just an art, but a connection to something deeper? Tonight, we explore the profound cultural significance of Arachne's craft in ancient Greece, and how knitting became more than just a skill. It became a legacy. In the quiet stillness of Arachne's endless weaving, something else began to stir. A connection between her work and the cultural fabric of ancient Greece itself. You see, in Greece, weaving wasn't just about making clothes. It was about creating the very essence of life, the threads that wove together communities, family bonds, and even the gods themselves. To weave was to hold the world together. Athena, the goddess who gifted mortals with the skill of weaving, had long been revered as the protector of craftsmen and artisans. She was not just the goddess of wisdom, but of the arts of the household, spinning, weaving, and crafting. For Athena, the act of weaving was tied to creation, to order, and to the balance of the universe. But there was something special about Arachne's weaving. Where Athena's work was divine and symbolic, Arachne's was human. It wasn't just about what was made, but how it was made and what it represented. Weaving in ancient Greece was often a metaphor for the very fabric of life, the famous myth of the Moirae, or the Fates, who controlled the life of every mortal and immortal by spinning, measuring, and cutting the thread of destiny, was rooted in the same concept. To weave was to shape destiny itself. In Arachne's work, there was something raw, something honest. Her tapestries were filled with stories, not just of gods, but of human struggles, greed, betrayal, jealousy, woven into the very fabric of her art. They reflected the flaws in the gods, the darkness of their actions, the emotions that led to wars and conquests. Arachne's work wasn't just about making something beautiful, it was about telling the truth. It was about showing the reality behind the mythology. Her tapestries spoke to the people of Greece, perhaps even more than Athena's divine creations. They weren't perfect, and that was what made them authentic. Arachne's art reflected the imperfection of human life, the struggles, the joys, the contradictions that made people real. And so, as Arachne wove, she wasn't just passing time. She wasn't just working in silence, weaving webs to survive. She was telling a story that would live on through her art, through every thread she spun. But while Arachne's work may have spoken of imperfection, it also spoke of resilience. No matter how many times her tapestry unraveled, No matter how many times her fate seemed sealed, she continued to weave, continued to create, continued to express. In that sense, Arachne's work, her transformation into a spider, was a symbol of the human condition, how we are always caught in the webs of our own decisions, but also how we find beauty in persistence. Even in the most difficult moments, we can create something beautiful, even if it means spinning that beauty over and over in silence for eternity. Weaving wasn't just an art form for Arachne, it was her way of speaking. Her tapestries were her voice, her stories, her legacy. And as the years passed, even the gods, who once looked down on her with disdain, began to see the truth of her work. Athena, in her infinite wisdom, must have understood that Arachne was not just a rebellious mortal, she was a true artist, a creator in her own right. She was the embodiment of the human spirit, flawed but unyielding. What if the goddess of wisdom saw herself in her greatest rival? Tonight, we explore Athena's lasting influence on craftspeople, how a challenge turned into a lesson for the gods themselves. As the years went by, Arachne's transformation into the eternal weaver was not just a tale of punishment. It was a tale that echoed through the very fabric of Greek culture, inspiring all those who worked with their hands. And oddly enough, Athena, the goddess who had cast the curse, found herself a part of that legacy. You see, Athena wasn't just a goddess of wisdom. She was the patron of craftspeople, artisans, and those who used skill to shape the world around them. She had gifted mortals the arts of weaving, spinning, and even architecture. It was she who first taught the Greeks how to craft objects of beauty, utility, and power. But after the competition with Arachne, Athena's relationship with the art of weaving shifted. It wasn't about the simple transmission of knowledge anymore. It was about the deeper connection between craftsmanship and the human soul. Arachne's challenge had not only revealed Athena's vulnerability, but had also transformed the very idea of art and creation in the eyes of the gods and mortals alike. Where once Athena had been the undisputed master of the loom, she now shared something of that mastery with Arachne, who had defied her. Athena's own creation, her magnificent tapestry, was filled with scenes of divine perfection, gods in their glory, controlling the fate of mortals. But Arachne, with her human touch, had shown a different side of art, the rawness of life. She had shown that art could be imperfect, chaotic, and even rebellious. In this, Athena saw something new. It was not enough to simply create with divine perfection. There had to be room for imperfection, for humanity, for stories that spoke not of flawless gods, but of real beings, flawed yet powerful. Athena had given Arachne a curse, but what she had also given was a lesson in the art of resilience, in the art of creation, despite adversity. Athena began to recognize that Arachne had been right in one crucial way. Art, in all its forms, must speak to the truth of life, its struggles, its imperfections, its ability to rise again after every fall. And so, Athena's influence on craftspeople took a new direction. Her teachings became more than just about creating perfection. They began to encompass a deeper understanding of creativity, the kind of creativity that came from human experience, the kind that embraced flaws as part of the beauty. As the centuries passed, this new vision of art spread across Greece. Craftspeople began to experiment, not just with the tools they used, but with the very nature of their craft. They started to weave stories of their own, to paint, sculpt, and carve representations of the imperfections that made people real. These artists were not just making objects for gods, they were making stories for mortals. Historians still debate the influence of Arachne on Greek art. Some argue that her transformation into a spider was the ultimate punishment, forever tying her to the dark side of art, the never-ending act of weaving without rest. Others believe that Arachne, in her eternal weaving, became a symbol of human persistence, a model for all artists who struggled and triumphed in their own creative battles. But one thing is certain: Athena's teachings, in the end, had been expanded, not by her own perfect creations, but by the imperfections and bravery of a mortal girl who dared to challenge the gods. And as the years went on, Athena's gifts to craftspeople were not just lessons of divine perfection, but of human truth, wrapped in silk, woven through stories and passed down through the generations. When Arachne became a spider, she wasn't just cursed, she became part of a greater myth. Tonight, we unravel the strange and mystical role spiders played in Greek mythology and what they came to symbolize, as Arachne's transformation into a spider became more than just a personal curse. It echoed through the halls of Greek mythology, leaving an indelible mark on how spiders would be viewed in the ancient world. The image of the spider, once just a simple creature, began to take on a deeper symbolic meaning. The Greeks, as they often did, wove myths around everything in nature, giving significance to every animal, every phenomenon. But spiders were different. Their web-spinning abilities, their silence, their quiet persistence, these qualities gave them a mystical aura that made them both feared and revered. In ancient Greece, spiders were seen as creatures of both creation and destruction. They spun delicate webs, symbols of intricate craftsmanship and patience, but they were also often connected to more sinister imagery. Arachne's curse helped solidify the spider's dual role in Greek myth, one that represented life and death, beauty and terror. The connection between Arachne and the spider was more than just a physical transformation. In Greek culture, spiders were associated with fate, just like the Moirae, the fates who spun the threads of destiny. The spider wove its web, connecting the past, present, and future. Each thread of the web, each strand of silk, was like the weaving of fate itself, just as Arachne had spun her tapestry of divine and mortal struggles. Now she spun her web, linking her existence to the ever-present flow of time. But the spider wasn't always viewed with admiration. The Greeks saw spiders as creatures that could trick and ensnare, just as Arachne's web had once entangled the gods. To be caught in a spider's web was seen as a form of entrapment, a symbol of being caught by fate, unable to escape the intricate pattern of life. Yet, even in their darker role, spiders were also admired. Athena herself, despite her punishment of Arachne, was sometimes associated with spiders in a more gentle light. Spiders, like Athena, were skilled in creation, meticulous in their craft. In fact, spiders were often depicted as symbols of artistry and wisdom, qualities that Athena embodied as the goddess of weaving and the arts. The Greeks, ever the storytellers, gave spiders a place in their myths beyond just the role of a creature to be feared. There were tales of spiders being used as symbols of persistence, the endless act of weaving their webs over and over, much like the never-ending struggles of the gods and mortals alike. But it wasn't just Greek mythology that featured spiders. In other cultures too, the spider was seen as a creature that wove in destinies. The symbolism of the spider as a creator and a destroyer became a common thread in many myths, showing that, like Arachne, a spider's power lay not just in what it wove, but in the meaning behind its craft. Historians debate the exact origins of the spider's significance in mythology. Some say it was a purely Greek invention, born from the tale of Arachne's fall from grace. Others suggest that the symbol of the spider as a weaver of fate goes back even further, to the ancient world's reverence for the creatures of the earth that shape the destiny of all living things. But one thing is clear: Arachne, the woman who challenged the gods, who spun her fate into a tapestry of flaws and triumphs, became not just a legend, but a symbol of resilience. And in that resilience, the spider became a part of something greater, a timeless, eternal weaver of fate. From the gods to the mortals, weaving and knitting weren't just skills, they were stories. Tonight, we explore how Arachne's legacy influenced the culture of ancient Greece, and how her art became part of a much larger tradition. In the ancient Greek world, weaving was more than just a craft. It was a ritual, a form of storytelling, and a reflection of life itself. For the Greeks, the act of spinning and weaving was not simply about creating cloth. It was about bringing order to chaos, connecting the past with the present, and creating something that would last. much like the gods and the tales they wove. Arachne's skill in weaving wasn't just a talent, it was a symbol of the human capacity to create beauty out of the ordinary. In the myth, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and crafts, had already gifted this art to humanity. But Arachne's work went a step further. She used her weaving to tell truths. Truths about the gods, about human nature, and about the world in which they lived. The Greeks revered weaving not just as a domestic skill, but as something divine. The goddesses of the hearth and home, like Hestia and Athena, were also the patrons of these arts. Athena, in particular, was known for her divine connection to craftsmanship, whether it was the construction of the Parthenon or the skill of weaving tapestries of great intricacy. For the Greeks, the loom was symbolic. The threads being woven were seen as a metaphor for the very fabric of existence. Just as Arachne had spun her tapestry, the Fates spun the threads of human life. The Moirae, or Fates, were three sisters who controlled the destiny of every mortal and immortal by spinning, measuring, and cutting the threads of life. To weave, then, was not simply a craft. It was an act of controlling fate itself. But the practice of weaving went beyond the divine realm. In Greek society, weaving was a widely respected profession. Women, especially in rural areas, spent much of their time weaving clothing, blankets, and tapestries for their families. These items weren't just functional, they were also works of art, carefully created and imbued with significance. The stories woven into the fabric were often symbolic, representing the gods, nature, or the cycles of life. Some tapestries depicted myths, like the labors of Heracles, or the adventures of gods and heroes. Others focused on the daily life of mortals, reflecting the values, beliefs, and struggles of the people who made them. In this way, weaving was a way to preserve stories, to pass down cultural history and mythology from one generation to the next. Even in the grand temples, the art of weaving was practiced. Tapestries were often hung in sacred spaces, showing the divine presence of the gods or honoring their deeds. These sacred weavings were not just decoration, they were ritualistic, enhancing the connection between mortals and the divine. But Arachne's story stands out. While the gods like Athena used weaving to create order, Arachne used her weaving to show the flaws in the gods. Her tapestry didn't just tell the myth of the gods, it exposed their human weaknesses, and in doing so, Arachne's weaving became an act of rebellion, an expression of humanity's desire to control its own destiny. Her skill in weaving was a testament to human potential, and even after she was turned into a spider, her ability to spin was no longer just a curse. It became a symbol of resilience, a symbol of the creative spirit that cannot be extinguished, even when trapped in the confines of fate. Historians still reflect on the significance of Arachne's tale, not just as a myth of punishment, but as a warning about the limits of divine power. Arachne had dared to challenge the gods, and in doing so, she showed the world that even mortals could make their mark on the universe through art. Her legacy was not one of defeat, it was one of immortality. For just as the Fates spun the threads of life, Arachne, in her endless weaving, had spun a new kind of immortality, one that was woven into the very fabric of Greek culture. Athena's legacy didn't end with Arachne's challenge. It lived on in the hands of craftsmen and artisans. Tonight, we explore how the goddess of wisdom shaped the lives of artists and creators, long after her encounter with the mortal weaver. Athena had always been more than just the goddess of wisdom. She was the patroness of the arts, the protector of craftspeople, and the guiding force behind every skilled hand that worked with needle, thread, and loom. Her influence was far-reaching, not just in the realm of the gods, but in the world of mortals as well. After the fateful contest with Arachne, Athena's perspective on the craft of weaving shifted. Where once she had seen herself as the unchallenged, master of all creative endeavors, the challenge of Arachne opened her eyes to something deeper. Athena's wisdom was not just in her perfection, but in her ability to understand and appreciate the human experience, even the flaws, the mistakes, the imperfections. This new understanding was not lost on mortals. Artists, craftsmen, and weavers across Greece began to recognize Athena not just as the goddess who bestowed knowledge, but as a symbol of perseverance and creativity, even in the face of failure or adversity. She became not just a figure to revere, but a figure to emulate. The skill of weaving, which Athena had so freely shared with mortals, became a sacred tradition in Greek culture. It was passed down from generation to generation, not just as a craft, but as a ritual, a practice that linked the mortal world with the divine. And Athena's influence as the patroness of weaving was felt in every thread, every knot, and every finished work of art. But Athena's influence didn't stop with weaving. She was also the goddess of architecture, pottery, sculpture, and metalworking. She represented the intersection of wisdom and creation, teaching that true artistry was not just about technique, but about the heart and mind behind the work. In the grand temples of Athens, the Parthenon, with its intricate columns and sculptures, was a direct result of Athena's guidance. Her teachings shaped not just the craftsmen who worked on the temples, but the artists who adorned them with stories of gods, heroes, and myths that captured the very essence of Greek culture. For centuries, Athena's influence guided the hands of craftspeople throughout the ancient world. She encouraged artists to explore their craft beyond perfection, to push the boundaries of creativity, and to embrace the flaws in their work. And in this way, Athena's teachings lived on long after her own time, shaping the artistic traditions of generations to come. But even more than that, Athena's impact was felt on a personal level. She taught artisans and creators that their craft was more than just a means to an end. It was a way to express themselves, to connect with the divine, and to leave their mark on the world. Athena believed that every act of creation was an offering to the gods, a chance for mortals to share their inner world with the greater cosmos. Historians often reflect on how Athena's influence shaped the cultural landscape of Greece. Some argue that without her, the artistic achievements of the Greek world might have been vastly different, less focused on truth and expression, more concerned with form and structure. Others believe that Athena's teachings opened the doors to an era of artistic exploration, one that encouraged artists to question, to challenge, and to embrace the imperfections that made their work truly human. But perhaps the most important lesson Athena imparted to the world of craftsmen was this: that art is not just about creating things, it's about creating meaning. It's about understanding that every work of art is a reflection of the creator, their emotions, their struggles, and their triumphs. In Arachne's story, Athena's teachings were tested, but in the end, the goddess showed the world that even the most rebellious mortals had a place in the realm of creativity. Arachne's art, her weaving, had become more than just a challenge. It had become a part of the fabric of Greek art, a symbol of human resilience, creativity, and the power of transformation. From goddess to spider, Arachne's fate doesn't just shape her life, it transforms the very meaning of the spider in Greek mythology. Tonight, we dive into the strange symbolic world of spiders and how they came to represent more than just webs. The moment Arachne was transformed into a spider, she ceased to be a mere mortal. She became part of a larger myth, a symbol woven into the very fabric of Greek storytelling. And in that transformation, spiders became more than just insects. They became creatures of mystery, symbolism, and destiny. In Greek mythology, creatures were rarely without meaning. Every animal, every phenomenon, carried with it a symbolic weight. And when Arachne was cursed to live as a spider, her fate didn't just affect her. It changed how spiders were viewed by the Greeks, and perhaps even by the gods themselves. Spiders, once just humble creatures weaving their webs, were now seen as beings that embodied something much deeper. They became creatures that wove the threads of fate, just like the Moirae, the fates who spun, measured, and cut the lives of gods and mortals alike. The comparison was clear. Spiders, like the fates, weaved the fabric of the world, both creating and destroying with their threads. In this new light, the spider was no longer just a simple creature of the earth. It was a symbol of control, a weaver of fate, and a reflection of divine order and chaos. In Arachne's endless weaving, she became the embodiment of this duality. She was a creator, making intricate and beautiful webs that rivaled the finest tapestries, but she was also a prisoner, trapped in her own creation, bound by the curse placed upon her. Spiders in Greek myth became symbols of persistence. They were creatures that, like Arachne, never stopped weaving. Even in the face of adversity, they spun their webs, silent, patient, relentless. They became a symbol of the human spirit itself, a reflection of resilience in the face of hardship. No matter how many times their webs were broken, the spider would rebuild. No matter how many times Arachne's fate seemed sealed, she would continue weaving. But there was another side to the spider's symbolism. In Greek mythology, the spider was also a trickster, much like the gods themselves. The webs that the spider spun could entrap, could trap, and ensnare their prey. The webs could also symbolize the intricacies of life, how one small misstep could pull someone into a complex web of consequences. The Greeks didn't just view spiders as tools of creation, they saw them as guardians of secrets, creatures who could keep things hidden, trapped in their delicate threads. And perhaps that's why, despite her punishment, Arachne's webs took on such importance. She was no longer just a victim of the gods. She was now a keeper of something far more profound. And in a way, her webs became more than just artistic expression. They became a message, a reminder of how we are all connected, trapped by our own fate, yet given the opportunity to create something beautiful within it. Through Arachne's transformation, spiders in Greek mythology became the ultimate symbol of both creation and destruction. The gods, who had once watched with disdain as Arachne challenged them, now looked upon her in a different light. Athena may have been the goddess of wisdom and weaving, but Arachne, now a spider, had become something new, something more complex. She was a creator, but one who wove not just beauty, but a new form of divine order. Some historians still argue whether Arachne's transformation into a spider was truly a punishment or an elevation to a higher form of creation. Was she being punished for her arrogance, or was she being granted a different kind of immortality, one that allowed her to continue creating forever? Regardless of the answer, one thing is certain. Arachne's curse forever changed how the Greeks saw spiders. No longer just a nuisance or a simple creature of nature, the spider had become a creature of myth, a weaver of fate, and a symbol of artistic endurance. From weaving tales to creating art, Arachne's legacy lived on long after her transformation. Tonight, we look at the importance of weaving and crafting in Greek culture, and how Arachne's tale wove its way into the lives of artists for generations. In the ancient Greek world, weaving wasn't just a practical skill, it was a way to connect with the divine, a ritual of creation that transcended mere fabric. It was, in many ways, a reflection of the culture itself, intricate, detailed, and woven into the very fabric of their identity. Weaving was sacred. It wasn't just about making clothes or blankets. It was about telling stories, passing down wisdom, and, at times, even recording history. For the Greeks, the loom was a place of creation and expression, and the stories woven into fabric were as significant as the myths spoken aloud. And Arachne's story, though tragic, was woven into the heart of this tradition. The act of weaving, once a simple task, became more than just a craft. It became a symbol of defiance, a tool for self-expression, and a way to connect to something larger than oneself. Arachne's challenge, her transformation, and her eternal weaving all spoke to the human condition, the desire to create, to challenge, and to leave a mark on the world, no matter how long it might take. For the Greeks, weaving was not only associated with the goddess Athena, who had gifted them the art of craftsmanship, but it also became a rite of passage. Young girls were often taught to weave from an early age, and this skill became essential to their roles in society. Weaving was not just a domestic task, it was a skill that defined their place in the world, a measure of their worth and creativity. Arachne's transformation into a spider didn't erase the importance of weaving in Greek culture. Instead, it solidified the significance of perseverance and endurance. The story of Arachne reminded the Greeks that no matter the fate we face, we all have the ability to create and express ourselves in our own way. And even after she was transformed into a spider, Arachne's weaving never stopped. In a way, she had become the ultimate symbol of artistic resilience, a reminder that art is not just about perfection, but about persistence and expression. Her story was woven into the very culture of Greece, inspiring generations of weavers, painters, and sculptors. Artists, whether they worked with fabric, clay, or marble, looked to Arachne's tale as a reminder of the power of human creativity, the need to express, and the freedom that comes from the act of creation. Arachne's weaving became a legacy, not one of punishment, but of art, a way to live forever in the work we create. In this way, Arachne's art, though born of defiance, had transcended her punishment. It had become something larger than herself, something that spoke to the enduring power of human creativity. As the years went on, Arachne's tale was passed down through generations, woven into the tapestry of Greek culture. Her transformation, her perseverance, and her unmatched skill became a story that continued to inspire artists, not just in Greece, but across the ancient world. In a way, Arachne had become her own tapestry, woven into the mythological fabric of Greece for eternity. Athena's influence spread far beyond her contest with Arachne. Tonight, we explore how her wisdom shaped generations of artisans, from the gods themselves to the humble weavers in every Greek home. As the centuries passed, Athena's impact on craftspeople became undeniable. Her teachings didn't just live on in her divine works, or in the lessons she imparted to mortals. Her influence shaped the very foundation of Greek culture. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, weaving, and craftsmanship, became the patron of all, those who worked with their hands to create something lasting. Her legacy, birthed from the challenge with Arachne, extended to artists, builders, and craftsmen across Greece. It wasn't just about the technical skill. Athena's influence infused each piece of art with a sense of purpose, connection, and meaning. Athena's lessons transcended the mere act of weaving or crafting. She taught that art was an expression of the soul, a bridge between the divine and the mortal. When people worked, they were not just making objects, they were creating stories, shaping the world with their hands, just as the gods had shaped it with their powers. It was said that every artisan, whether a potter shaping clay or a sculptor chiseling marble, was guided by Athena's wisdom. Their hands moved with purpose, creating objects that were not only useful, but that reflected the beauty of the divine. Athena taught that creation was not just a matter of technique. It was about understanding the world around you, finding beauty in the ordinary, and transforming it into something extraordinary. Athena's role as the goddess of craftspeople meant that she was more than just a figure of divine power. She was the patron of those who created, those who molded, shaped, and built with their hands. Her influence was found in every corner of Greek society, in the homes of everyday mortals, in the workshops of artisans, and in the grand temples dedicated to the gods. But it wasn't just about the physical act of creation. Athena's influence also extended to the minds of the craftsmen. She encouraged them to think deeply about the meaning behind their work, to reflect on the stories they were telling through their art. Her wisdom was infused in every weaving and every carving, reminding the craftsmen that their work wasn't just about creating an object. It was about telling a story, about connecting to the past and shaping the future. In the temples of Athens, where Athena herself was worshipped, the work of craftspeople was given the highest honor. The Parthenon, a temple built in her honor, was a masterpiece of architecture, sculpted with precision. adorned with statues and friezes that told the story of the gods and heroes. The detailed carvings and the elegant proportions were not just the result of technical skill, they were a testament to the wisdom of Athena, the goddess who had taught the artisans to create with both the mind and the hands. Athena's legacy was not confined to her own time. Her wisdom and her influence lived on in every craftsman who picked up a tool, every artist who picked up a brush, and every weaver who spun a thread. Her teachings inspired generations, and the stories of her wisdom continued to resonate through the ages. Yet it was Arachne, in her defiance, who had forever altered the relationship between the divine and the mortal. Athena's anger at Arachne had been great, but the goddess had learned something from the mortal's audacity. She had learned that art, like the gods themselves, could be flawed, and that imperfection was as much a part of creativity as perfection. Arachne, though cursed, had taught Athena a valuable lesson, that the true beauty of creation lay not in perfection, but in the persistence of the creator. The fates spun the threads of destiny. Yes, but it was the weaver's hands, the artist's heart, that shaped the story of the world. As the generations passed, the legacy of both Athena and Arachne lived on in the hands of craftspeople. Every time a weaver sat down to her loom, every time a sculptor chiseled away at marble, they did so not just with the knowledge passed down by the gods, but with the wisdom of two forces, one divine and one human, that had forever changed the way art was created and understood. Arachne's transformation wasn't just a punishment, it became a symbol. Tonight, we explore how spiders, once simple creatures, took on profound meaning in Greek mythology, and how Arachne's curse became a tale of immortality through art. Arachne's transformation into a spider wasn't merely a tragic end to her story. It was, in fact, a metaphor, a reflection of how the Greeks viewed creativity and fate. The spider, once a humble creature, became a symbol of both artistic endurance and perseverance. In the world of Greek mythology, creatures were never just animals. They were metaphors, symbols of something much greater than their physical form. And when Arachne became a spider, the creature transformed from an insignificant insect into something far more meaningful. The Greeks saw the spider as a weaver of fate, just like the Moirae, the fates, who spun, measured, and cut the threads of life. The spider's web was a reflection of the very fabric of life itself, its threads intertwined, its patterns complex, and its existence marked by an endless cycle of creation and destruction. The spider was the embodiment of time, an eternal spinner of destiny. Arachne, forever cursed to weave, took on the role of the divine weaver, creating her intricate webs in silence. But her webs, unlike Athena's perfect creations, were flawed, imperfect, yet still beautiful in their own right. She had become a symbol of human resilience, a reminder that even in the face of punishment and loss, creativity could still endure. And this new role of the spider, weaving its delicate webs, became an enduring symbol in Greek culture. The spider was not just an artist, it was a guardian of fate. It spun its webs, just as the fates spun the threads of human lives. The Greeks, ever fond of symbolism, saw in the spider's work a reflection of their own destiny, how life was a delicate balance of creation, destruction, and the unknown forces that shaped the world. The image of the spider was also linked to the concept of trickery. In many myths, spiders were depicted as clever creatures, capable of ensnaring their prey with their webs. In this sense, the spider represented control, the ability to entrap, to manipulate fate, and to control the flow of life. Arachne's web, her constant spinning, was a reminder of this power. She had once been trapped by the gods, but in her eternal weaving, she had become the one to weave fate itself. The spider's web was no longer just a trap for insects. It was a symbol of creation and destruction, of life and death, of the threads, of existence themselves. As Arachne spun her webs, the Greeks began to view her transformation as a divine act. She was no longer just a mortal who had defied the gods. She was a creator in her own right, a weaver of destiny. Her curse had become her gift, and the spider, once a lowly creature, became a symbol of immortality through art. Historians and mythologists still debate the significance of Arachne's transformation. Some say it was a punishment for her pride and arrogance, while others argue that it was a divine recognition of her talent, a recognition that even the gods had to respect. What is clear, however, is that Arachne's story transcended her punishment and became something much more. She had become a myth within a myth. Her transformation into a spider, a symbol of the eternal struggle between the mortal and the divine. Her webs, like her art, would live on for eternity, woven into the fabric of Greek mythology, a reminder that creation never stops, even in the face of fate. From Arachne's curse to the hands of everyday artisans, Greek culture saw weaving as more than a craft. It was a way to connect with the gods, with fate, and with the power of creation itself. Tonight, we explore how this art became an essential part of Greek life. Weaving wasn't just a way to make clothes or blankets in ancient Greece. It was a cultural cornerstone. It was a ritual, a way for mortals to connect with the divine, and a symbol of resilience, passed down from gods to humans. Athena had blessed the people with this sacred craft, but it was Arachne's story that redefined its meaning, turning it from a simple task into a symbol of creation and transformation. Weaving in ancient Greece was deeply connected to the divine. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had taught the art to mortals as a gift and a responsibility. It wasn't simply about creating functional pieces. It was about weaving stories, beliefs, and the very fabric of existence. It was an art that tied humans to the gods and the world around them, creating a sense of purpose and connection through every thread spun. Arachne's curse, however, introduced a new dimension to weaving. In her endless spinning, she became not just an artist, but a symbol of human perseverance, of turning hardship into beauty. Her web became a testament to the human spirit, showing that even when trapped by fate, the act of creation could transcend its circumstances and become something greater than the creator's initial intentions. As her story spread, weaving became a ritualistic practice in Greek society. It was not just the art of making things, it was a way to tell stories. Every weave, every stitch, was an opportunity to connect with the gods and the world's deeper meaning. Tapestries and cloths were adorned with myths, heroes, and divine symbols, turning the fabric of life into something sacred. The influence of Arachne and Athena's myths spread beyond the loom. In ancient Greece, weaving was seen as a form of personal expression and communication. Women, in particular, used their skill with the loom to share their stories, their beliefs, and their connections to the divine. The patterns they wove weren't just decorative. They were windows into their inner worlds, their thoughts, their values, and their reverence for the gods. But Arachne's story also taught that even the gods were flawed. Weaving wasn't just about creating perfection. It was about embracing imperfection, about telling the truth of life through the art. Just as Arachne had woven a tapestry that depicted the gods' flaws, so too did her curse teach that even in the divine realm, there were imperfections, challenges, and struggles. This idea resonated deeply with the Greek people, who found comfort in knowing that life itself was full of complexity, and that it was okay to show that complexity in art. The weaving culture of Greece evolved over the centuries. Tapestries adorned temples, homes, and public spaces, each piece telling a story of the gods or reflecting the culture's values. But the influence of Arachne remained at the heart of it. Every weaver, from the humble artisan to the great sculptor, carried a piece of Arachne's legacy, the idea that creation was not just about technical skill, but about honesty and expression. As the years passed, the Greeks continued to weave, not just with thread, but with stories, creating a fabric of culture that would last for generations. They wove with the wisdom of the gods, the resilience of mortals, and the truth of their lives. Arachne, though cursed, had become more than just a fallen mortal. She had become a symbol of the creative spirit that lived on in every artist's work. Her webs, spun in eternal silence, were her legacy, her story, her gift to the world. The act of weaving, now seen through the lens of both the divine and the mortal, became a powerful reminder that creativity never truly dies, even in the face of destiny. As the story of Arachne and Athena fades into the quiet corners of your mind, let the soft hum of the world around you begin to fade as well. The loom stops spinning, the web rests, and now it's your turn to rest too. With every breath, feel the weight of the day lifting, your body sinking into comfort, your mind becoming lighter, and your thoughts gently drifting away. Just as Arachne wove her tapestry in silence, now you can weave your own peaceful dreams, soft and warm, like the threads of her eternal web. So, close your eyes, let go of the world, and drift into sleep, where dreams are woven with the same patience and beauty as the finest threads. Good night, dreamer. Sweet dreams.